and thank you very much for inviting me to talk today on this International Day of the Midwife. First of all, before I start, I'd like to thank my team at London South Bank University. We are a very diverse teaching team, and we are very committed to the concept of cultural safety. We are currently formulating a new curriculum, which will be starting in September 2021. And obviously within that, trying to embrace diversity and caring for women from diverse backgrounds and making sure that the students that we produce from London South Bank University are fit for purpose and fit for practice. So my session today is on cultural safety. And cultural safety is a concept that was first developed in New Zealand to provide quality care within the cultural values and norms of the Maori people. New Zealand, like other countries such as Australia and Canada, have a truly bicultural population. They have the indigenous population of the Maori people, and then they have obviously people that have migrated into the country and settled there. The concept of cultural safety is actually spread into other fields of human services like education and also to other parts of the world, particularly where there are indigenous people in former European colonies. So let's look at the definition of cultural safety. For cultural safety to occur, it has to occur in an environment that is spiritually, socially, and emotionally safe, as well as physically safe for people, where there's no assault, challenge, or denial of their identity, of who they are and what they need. And it really is about shared respect, shared meaning, and shared knowledge and experience of learning together. And when we talk about culture, culture means different things to different people, but really it's about looking at culture of age, generation, gender, sexual orientation, occupation, socioeconomic status, as well as the common things like ethnic origin, and also migrant experience, religion, spiritual beliefs, and disability. So culture encompasses all of those things, not just about where you are from and your cultural background. And so if we look at what culturally unsafe care is, culturally unsafe care is any actions that diminish, demean, or disempower the cultural identity and well-being of an individual. And this is really relevant to midwifery practice because we know that in the UK and obviously in London, we do deal with a very diverse childbearing population. We have people from many, many different cultures, different backgrounds, religions, people who identify with different genders, individuals of different sexuality. And we need to remember that it's very, 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 very diverse, the women that we look after. And it's very important to acknowledge that we're looking after women in maternity services or anyone who's engaging with maternity services. Now, the Nursing Council of New Zealand has actually incorporated cultural safety into their code, which is obviously the equivalent to our NMC code, stating that for a person to actually get into the register, they have to demonstrate that they are actually culturally safe. So I think that's really important. Now, when we think about cultural safety, people say, well, we're all about cultural competency. And I would say that when we think about cultural competency, there is importance of having cultural competency. And here we look at two quite common modules. The first one being from Campina-Bocote, that developed a cultural competency model, which talked about the individual, in order to achieve cultural competency, would have to have cultural knowledge, cultural awareness, cultural desire. That's a desire to learn about other cultures, cultural skill, and obviously cultural encounters. And then we look at the yellow box cultural competency module. This is one from Papadopoulos, and this is talking about cultural awareness, cultural knowledge, and cultural sensitivity being important components of cultural competency. Now, I have no issues with cultural competency because I think when you're looking after people from very diverse backgrounds, you need to have some cultural knowledge. And from that, you start to develop your cultural awareness and your cultural sensitivity. And obviously, you start to develop then your cultural skill. And of course, you won't be able to acquire that knowledge unless you have the cultural desire to work or look after women from different cultures. And of course, you need to have a good degree of cultural encounters. And the issue of cultural knowledge is that when you're looking after people from so many different backgrounds, and we know that there's a variety of them, it's very difficult to acquire enough level of cultural knowledge to be able to care for that person. And also within that, even if you do have a good degree of cultural knowledge about a woman from a particular background, the issue then is that every woman is an individual. So then, even though they come from a particular culture or background, they may not practice the culture in the same way. So cultural knowledge is good to some extent, and cultural competency is good to some extent. But the issue is that if you have them to look after women who are very, very diverse, and that's the case that we have in the UK today, then the issue is that you're not going to be able to acquire that level of cultural knowledge that you need to provide that care. So that's the difference between cultural competency versus cultural safety. Cultural safety is a different concept altogether. And I would like to say it's probably more of an umbrella term for cultural, that sits above cultural competency. So how do you move from the concept to outcome with cultural safety? Well, there are a few things we can do. And the first thing that we need to do as midwife practitioners is to look at your own cultural identity, first of all. Okay, so it's not about focusing on the woman that you are caring for, it's focusing on yourself. And also looking at your own cultural identity and attitudes, and being open-minded and being very flexible in your attitudes towards people who are different from you or practice a different culture from yourself. So it's really important to understand that you have to look at your own culture and look at how it influences how you think, feel, and behave. And in this way, you can start to address issues of racism, discrimination, unconscious bias, and stereotyping. Because once you know who you are and where your mindset is, then you can start to be more aware of other cultures, and then in that way be very, very, very sensitive to other cultures as well. So cultural awareness. In cultural safety, self-awareness and the importance of self-culture are more important than the awareness of the culture of the woman. Because of course we know that your own culture plays an important role in power inequalities and healthcare interactions. Now, midwives, the way we practice is that we practice from a place of experience, and maybe if we have looked after another woman from maybe a similar background, we might probably try to care for another woman from the same background in the same way, which is actually incorrect. So that's important. So your self-awareness is important. And also, if you start to become culturally safe, then you start to acknowledge the barriers to clinical effectiveness, which arise from the inherent power imbalances between healthcare professionals and the woman that you are caring for. And as I said before, when you start to develop cultural awareness, then you start to recognize the assumptions and beliefs behind your thoughts and actions, and also how they influence the care that you are providing. And it is very difficult, but it's about having a critical lens on your own culture and understanding how that impacts on the care that you provide. So strategies to enhance cultural safety: be with women and talk to women is one of the key things you need to do. Clear, value-free, open and respectful communication. Start to develop trust with the woman. Recognizing and avoiding stereotypical barriers. And then key one, being prepared to engage with others in a two-way dialogue when knowledge is shared. And when I talk about sharing knowledge, if you start to have that, if you have that cultural competency with a little bit of your knowledge and maybe awareness and sensitivity, you can start to have those open dialogue conversations with women. Finding out about their culture, talking about your culture, and having that open dialogue and two-way dialogue to discuss how the care that you're providing influences on the woman's identity. One of the key things that we tend to do as midwives is that obviously we prescribe care in a way that disempowers the woman. The woman obviously gets pregnant. It's a hidden phenomenon, and then obviously they have to start to engage with maternity units. They have to come in for a booking interview, and as soon as they step through the door, that's when they start to become disempowered. Because what are we doing? We are actually putting the culture of ourselves and the culture of the organization and asking the woman to embrace that culture. So how do we move from individuals to institutions regarding cultural safety? So when we reflect on cultural safety, obviously, as I mentioned already, our judgments, attitudes, and perspectives will vary according to our own experience and training. Don't forget, before we come into training, we have our own culture. And then when we come into training, we develop another culture, which is the midwife professional culture. We need to remember that everyone is shaped by various cultural factors. Everyone has a culture. It doesn't matter where you're from. You don't have to be from Africa, Asia, or anywhere else. You can be UK, born and bred, and you have a culture, okay? We have to remember that a normal part of ethical professional practice is to become aware of and reflect on our own attitudes. That's what we need to do. We have to remember that our attitudes impact on our values, and it impacts on our relationships with the people that we work with. And also we have to remember that on a day-to-day basis, what we do unconsciously is impose our culture on cultures of the woman that we are caring for. When we talk about the midwife professional culture, we need to think about how that's developed. So of course, people come into the midwifery profession, we come in as students, we get training, and the training and the culture comes from the NMC. The NMC tells us how we need to train to get onto the register. The standards and proficiencies come from the NMC. These are the things you need to do to become a midwife. And so we start to adapt our own personal culture. And what we're doing is we're molding people into a profession where they're able to be on the register and work as a midwife. So the NMC standards are important, and also the training. So our higher education institutes, we are now molding students to behave in a certain way, to talk in a certain way in order to practice. And of course, if you don't do that, you don't qualify, you don't finish, and then you don't practice. Then once we've done that training and we are on the register, then we need to think about the workplace culture. And obviously in the workplace culture, everyone knows when you work in the maternity unit, there are coaches there. There's organizational culture. There's coaches of the other myriad of individuals that you are working with as well. You've got your obstetricians, you've got your other medical practitioners, you've got your nurses, other midwives. And so you can see that you've got the individual cultures of the individuals. They've got their professional training, which most of them in a particular way. And then we've got the organizational culture, which is molded by policy. And so these are the things that the woman has to deal with. They have to deal with the midwife's personal culture, her professional culture, and then they have to deal with the workplace culture. And so what happens is that we could move from a place of pre-competence, do our training, we start to become culturally aware, we start to engage in looking after women from different cultures, we start to develop some degree of cultural competence. And then regarding cultural safety, we now have to think about what is the personal identity of the woman? How do we protect that? And it's very easy to protect the cultural identity of the woman. It's about understanding her viewpoint, understanding her wishes, and understanding her beliefs and values. Understanding your beliefs and values and how that may conflict or differ from the woman's beliefs and values. And then making sure that the woman tells you what she wishes for, what she thinks she needs to have to achieve a successful pregnancy and a good outcome. And these are the things that are important, I think, in today, because obviously when I trained 20 years ago, it was very, very different to today. And when I did my training, there was nothing mentioned about culture and cultural competency. I never heard the word. There was nothing mentioned about racism or discrimination. We knew it was there, but it was never talked to us in, verbalized to us in our midwifery training. And when you went into the clinical area, you just basically you provided the care as prescribed, obviously by unit policy. And obviously, when you look at your Miles textbook or your Mays textbook, it tells you how you need to provide the care. And there is a little bit in there around cultural competency and cultural safety. But I think what we need to do now in midwifery practice today is just look at who determines that the woman's care is culturally safe. Is it us or is it woman? How do you know that the woman is having culturally safe care? So those are the things that we need to think of. And so that's the end of my presentation. I'm happy to get any questions. Thank you.
Thanks for watching this video from the Maternity and Midwifery Forum. For more expert opinion and analysis, hit the button below to subscribe.